Before I tell you what happened, let me just say this. Sometimes life has a way of handing you moments you never saw coming. Moments that make you question everything you thought you knew about people. And that's exactly what happened to me the night my daughter's boyfriend made an offer I'll never forget. Where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. I'd love hearing the cities and towns you're tuning in from. It all began on a quiet Friday evening, the kind of evening where you expect nothing but the usual, a cup of tea, maybe a movie, and an early night. My daughter Olivia had invited her boyfriend Daniel over for dinner. I'd met him a handful of times before, and while he was polite and well-mannered, we never had more than surface-level conversations. You know the kind. Weather, work, how's your week going? Safe topics with no depth. That night, though, something felt different from the start. Olivia had called earlier, saying she'd be late getting home from work, but Daniel was still going to stop by as planned. She said he could keep me company until she arrived. First, I thought it might be a little awkward. After all, I was just the mom and he was still probably nervous around me. But I agreed. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to see him standing there, holding a paper bag from the bakery down the street. Olivia mentioned you like their cinnamon rolls, he said, his voice warm, but with that hint of shyness I'd noticed before. I smiled, touched by the small gesture. You didn't have to do that, Daniel. I wanted to, he replied simply. We ended up in the kitchen. The overhead light cast in a soft golden glow across the counter as I made tea for both of us. It's funny how small things can change the way you see a person. The way he poured the tea without being asked. How he noticed the candle on the table and lit it without a word. First, our conversation was light, just like before. But as the minutes ticked by, it shifted. He asked me about my job, my hobbies, even the places I'd love to visit someday. His questions weren't the kind people ask just to be polite. He actually listened to my answers. When I told him about my love for photography, his eyes lit up. Olivia mentioned that once. You take pictures of more than just family, right? I nodded. Nature mostly. Sunsets, trees in the fall, the way light filters through leaves. Those moments that make you stop and breathe. There was a pause, and then he leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. I think that's what I like about you, he said, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. You notice things other people miss. Caught me off guard. Compliments like that don't usually come from people you've only shared a few dinners with. I laughed lightly, trying to brush it off, but inside I felt a flicker of something. Not romantic, not in that way, but a sense of being truly seen. Olivia still wasn't home, and the night stretched on. We moved to the living room, the TV murmuring in the background. While we talked more, I learned he'd been taking evening classes in graphic design, that he used to help his grandfather with carpentry projects, and that he secretly loved cooking but was terrible at baking. And then the offer came. It was so unexpected. I almost didn't believe I'd heard him right. He'd noticed my old camera sitting on the side table, a vintage film camera I hadn't used in years, and asked about it. I told him it still worked, but finding the right film was tricky these days. Why don't we fix that? He said. I know a place that develops film the old way. I could take you there this weekend. We could even make a day of it. Go somewhere scenic. Get you back into photography. First, I hesitated. The idea of spending an entire day with my daughter's boyfriend felt unusual. Not wrong, but not something I'd ever considered. I must have looked unsure because he quickly added, only if you'd like to. No pressure. I just think it'd be nice to see you behind a camera again. Something about the sincerity in his tone made me soften. There was no hidden agenda, no awkwardness, just a genuine desire to share something he thought I'd enjoy. I'll think about it, I said with a small smile. When Olivia finally came home, the atmosphere in the room felt different, warmer somehow. She noticed it too, glancing between us with a curious look, but didn't say anything. That night, lying in bed, I kept replaying our conversation. Not because there was anything inappropriate about it, but because it had stirred something in me I hadn't felt in years, the sense that someone was paying attention to who I really was beyond the role of mom. And I couldn't help but wonder, if I said yes to his offer, where might that lead? Morning arrived soft and blue. The kind of light that makes everything feel like a fresh page. I woke earlier than usual, a little fluttery in the chest in a way I hadn't felt since my kids were small. And Saturdays meant soccer games and thermoses of coffee. Olivia had left me a text at midnight. running late with a project, sleeping in, followed by a winky face I wasn't sure how to interpret. Maybe she'd sensed there was more to last night than small talk. Not more in the way people jump to conclusions about, but more in the sense that a locked door inside me had clicked open. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window while the kettle whispered, and the trees across the street did that slow morning sway, the sun catching the edges of each leaf like a spotlight. The old film camera was on the counter where I placed it last night. Its leather strap cracked, the body scratched in the places you'd expect from a life lived honestly. I ran my thumb over the shutter release and felt a memory of my younger self. A version of me who used to lean into a moment and say yes without first measuring every potential consequence. By 9, Daniel texted. Good morning. The film shop opens at 10 o'clock. No rush. I'm ready whenever you are. A second later, as if he'd sensed I might overthink it. Another message. Only if you feel like it, Hannah. I smiled at the quiet respect tucked into that line. I told him, yes, I'd like that very much. He pulled up around 10:30 in a car that still smelled faintly of lumber and pine, probably from the weekend he'd helped his uncle redo a porch. When I stepped outside with the camera in a tote bag and a sweater over my shoulder, he rounded the hood and opened the passenger door for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Simple gestures unperformed. You look ready, he said, eyes flicking to the strap peeking from the back. I brought the dinosaur, I choked, lifting the tote. Let's see if it still has a heartbeat. We drove with the windows cracked and a playlist humming at a polite volume. He asked what kind of music I liked and I told him, the kind that leaves room for a voice to find you. He nodded and put on a singer I'd never heard of. Like guitar, a voice like a fishing line cast gently into a still lake. It wasn't long before we were talking again in that easy, unforced way about his design classes, about how I'd once wanted to intern for the local paper's photo desk, but chose steady office work when the kids came. Not a regret exactly, but a fork in the road you can still see when you look over your shoulder. The film shop was nestled between a violin repair place and a bakery I passed 100 times without noticing. Inside it smelled like dust and possibility. The owner, a woman with silver hair and hands that looked permanently ink-stained, greeted us like old friends. She ran her fingers over my camera with reverent efficiency, nodding at the make, the year, the where. She's stubborn sometimes, I admitted. But so am I. We can work with stubborn, the owner said, and by the time we left we had 2 rolls of film, one color, one black and white, and a promise that she could still process them in-house. Daniel paid before I could argue that same gentle insistence in his eyes. My treat, he said. Consider it an investment in your comeback. I laughed, but the word comeback sat warm in my chest like a small lamp that had been turned on. We drove north after that, out of town to a county park, where the river ran shallow over flat stones and sycamores leaned toward the water like they were trying to hear a secret. It was cool in the shade, warm in the sun, and the air was clear in a way that made colors feel honest. I loaded the film while Daniel watched with a quiet curiosity, handing me a clean cloth when he saw me wipe the viewfinder, stepping back when he sensed I needed to stand still and think about light. At first the world felt too big for the lens, my fingers clumsy, the frame disobedient, but then I remembered how to breathe before I looked, how to let my eyes soften until details arranged themselves. The first shot I took was a small thing, sunlight resting like a coin on the curve of a river stone. The second was a fallen leaf stuck midstream, turning slowly as the water nudged it forward. Tiny anchors to remind my hands who they'd been. You get that feeling? Daniel asked, stepping close enough to talk without raising his voice. Like time just slowed down to match your pulse. I do, I said. I'd forgotten how quiet it can be inside an image. We walked the trail, sometimes together, sometimes apart, giving each other a respectful berth. He pointed out a deer path I'd missed, a patch of low ferns that looked prehistoric when the wind went through them. I asked him about his design project. He was helping a local cafe rebrand with a new logo and menu, and his eyes brightened with the kind of pride you can't fake. I told him about the time I'd almost submitted a photo to a county fair, then chickened out and put the print in a drawer. You should take it out, he said, soft but certain. The world's not improved by your drawer. We picnicked on a fallen log around noon. Sandwiches he packed, and a thermos of coffee that tasted brave out of paper cups. A few steps away, the river made its small, durable sound. It was the sort of afternoon that would be easy to misinterpret if he wanted to, But there was never a moment when I felt anything other than respected, seen, and surprisingly invited back into my own life. When we stood to leave, he hesitated as if weighing a thought. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "And this may be none of my business, which is okay. But if those photos come out like I think they will, we could put them somewhere, even just online. I could help you set up a portfolio site. Simple, clean, your work, your name." I looked at him, the warm earnestness in his face, and felt a prickling at the back of my eyes. The offer, which had felt like a day trip in last night's kitchen, was suddenly larger. Not a door to him, but a door to me. "I wouldn't even know where to start," I said, half laughing at my own instinct to make myself smaller than a question. "I do," he said. "And I'd only do it if you wanted. No pressure. But sometimes it helps to have someone in your corner who can carry the technical part while you carry the art." I thought about how long I'd been the person who carried everything for everyone, schedules and recipes and extra sweaters and missed appointments, the names of teachers and doctors and neighbors' dogs. It hadn't occurred to me in a long time that someone might carry something for me, even something as simple as a domain name and a template I could grow into. Olivia texted while we were in the car heading back, asking if we could all meet for dinner later, the three of us. I felt a brief tremor of worry that she'd misunderstand the day, but the feeling passed. The truth was sturdy. We had spent time and paid attention to small things. That was it. And maybe that was everything. At home, I rinsed river dust from my hands and left the rolls at the film shop before we headed back. The owner promised they'd be ready in 2 days. 2 days felt like a lifetime in a blink. Anticipation made the house feel brighter, as if the walls had moved half an inch outward. Olivia arrived at 6, wearing that easy smile I'd not seen since the holidays. She hugged me first, then Daniel, then the two of them together like she was checking whether the space between us was still the right size. We ate at a little place with tin ceilings and black and white photos on the walls. The kind of restaurant that makes you feel like you've stepped into a frame. Conversation flowed. Their week. My week. The smell of the river. The cinnamon rolls from last night that we'd saved for dessert. At one point, Olivia reached across and tapped the tote where my camera rested on the seat beside me. "Did my mom get her groove back today?" she teased. "Your mom always had her groove," Daniel said good-natured, then caught my eye briefly as if to say, "I see what's been there all along." There was no flirtation in it, only a team captain's nod toward a reliable player. On the walk back to the car, Olivia slipped her hand through my arm like she used to when she was a teen, and the world felt too crowded. "Daniel told me about the website idea," she said. "I love it. I've been telling you to share your work for years." I braced for the undercurrent she might be feeling, but her voice was clear of it. "You don't feel weird about us spending the day?" I asked, choosing honesty over performance. She shook her head. "Mom, if you could meet the version of yourself you were when I came home tonight, you'd stop asking whether people are okay with that. You looked happy. That's the whole point." We got home under a sky that felt like velvet, stars just beginning to prick through. Daniel carried in a bag with leftover dessert and handed me a little notebook he picked up at the cafe earlier. "Plain cover, good paper. For image notes," he said, "or grocery lists, but I'm voting image notes." It was late when they left. I stood at the door and watched their taillights slide down the street, a red ribbon that split at the corner and dissolved. Inside the house was quiet in the way I've always loved, but the quiet had a new shape. It was companionable. Like a cat that chooses your lap after weeks of pretending you don't exist. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with the notebook and the camera. I wrote down what I'd seen. The coin of light on the stone, the way the leaf turned slowly as if it were deciding to trust the current. A little boy in a blue hat who kept throwing sticks and waiting for them to come back. I wrote down how Daniel had stepped aside without being asked, how he had offered not a map to himself, but a lantern for my road. And then the thought came, simple and solid. When the prints are ready, I'll pick them up. Choose 3 and let Daniel show me how to put them somewhere the world can find. Not because I'm chasing anything other than the feeling of standing still inside a good frame. Not because I owe him or because he sees me, though both are true, but because the offer he made first to spend a day, then to help build a place for the work, was really an invitation to return to a part of myself I missed and didn't even know how much. Before bed, I texted the film shop a thank you. And then, "Daniel, today was good. Thank you for making space. Let's talk about that site when the prints come in." He responded with a thumbs up and a line that made me laugh in the dark. Your art, your pace. I'm on standby with the screwdriver and the patience. As I lay there, I thought about how stories often get bent into only two shapes. The dramatic arc where sparks fly and rules break, or the careful cautionary tale where nothing happens at all. But there is a third shape, I think. The one where a moment offers you a respectful hand, and you take it, and together you lift something true out of the drawer. The night stilled around me like a developing room, quiet and dim, where the image is already there on the paper, and all you have to do is wait for it to appear. I slept well. In my dream, the river was a road, and I was walking it with a camera warm in my hands, everything head soft with morning. And though I was alone on the path, I knew that somewhere just out of frame was the help I'd been offered.